You're at the grocery store after work. You're standing in front of two types of pasta sauce. One costs $1 more, they're almost identical, and for some reason you cannot decide. This isn't laziness. It isn't indecision as a personality trait. This is something happening inside your brain that has nothing to do with who you are as a person. By the end of most days, simple choices start to feel strangely heavy, not because they matter more, but because something inside you has quietly run low. And most people never realize what's actually happening. We tend to think decision-making is a skill, that some people are just better at it, that if you're struggling to pick between two nearly identical things, you're overthinking, or you lack confidence, or you need to be more decisive. But that explanation misses something important. It treats every decision like it costs the same amount of effort, no matter when it happens. And that's not how your brain works. Research into decision-making has shown that making choices, even small ones, draws from a limited mental resource. Every time you decide something, you're using a little bit of that resource. And by the time you've made dozens or hundreds of micro-decisions throughout the day, that resource is depleted. This phenomenon is often described as decision fatigue. It's not about being tired in the general sense. It's about a specific kind of depletion that happens when your brain has been forced to evaluate options over and over again. What makes this uncomfortable is how invisible it is. You don't feel it building. You don't get a warning. You just notice suddenly that choosing between two shirts feels like solving a puzzle, or that picking a restaurant for dinner feels unbearably difficult. And here's where it gets strange. The difficulty isn't proportional to the importance of the decision. You can spend 3 minutes deciding whether to reply to a text now or later, and then make a significant financial choice in seconds, just because one happened earlier in the day than the other. Your brain doesn't care what the decision is about. It cares how many decisions it's already processed. And that changes everything about how you move through your day. Think about a normal workday. You wake up and decide what to wear. You decide what to eat. You decide when to leave. You decide which route to take. At work, you decide which email to answer first. You decide how to phrase a message. You decide whether to attend a meeting or decline it. You decide whether to take a break now or later. Each one feels small, but each one requires your brain to weigh options, predict outcomes, and commit to a choice. And that process, repeated constantly, wears you down in a way that's easy to miss. By the afternoon, you might find yourself avoiding decisions entirely. You pick the same lunch you always pick, not because you want it, but because choosing something new feels like too much work. You refresh the same website 5 times instead of deciding what to do next. You say yes to plans you don't really want, just to avoid the effort of saying no and explaining why. This is not weakness. This is your brain trying to conserve what's left. And it happens to everyone, whether they recognize it or not. One of the most unsettling parts of decision fatigue is how it changes your behavior without you noticing. Studies on judges have shown that the likelihood of granting parole drops significantly as the day goes on and resets after a break. The cases don't change. The judges don't become less fair on purpose, but their ability to fully engage with a difficult decision quietly declines. You probably do a version of this in your own life. You become more impulsive. You default to whatever's easiest. You avoid complexity. You lean toward no more often, or toward yes more often, depending on which requires less thought. And because this happens gradually, you don't connect it to the dozens of small decisions that came before. You just think you're being indecisive, or lazy, or difficult. You blame your personality instead of recognizing the process. What makes this even harder to spot is that decision fatigue doesn't feel like exhaustion. You can be physically energized and still mentally depleted when it comes to making choices. You can feel awake, alert, and still find yourself unable to decide whether to order pickup or delivery. It's a different kind of tired, one that only shows up when a decision is required, one that hides behind everything else you're feeling. Here's the part most people don't think about. Every choice you avoid or simplify to save effort is still being influenced by this depletion. When you wear the same thing every day, you might think it's about minimalism or efficiency, and maybe it is. But it's also about reducing the number of decisions you have to make before the day even starts. When you stick to routines, you're not just being disciplined, you're protecting yourself from decision overload. And when you finally break down at the end of a long day and pick the easiest, fastest, least healthy option, that's not a moral failure. That's what happens when your decision-making capacity has been drained. The uncomfortable truth is that you are not fully in control of how you choose. You like to think you are. You like to believe your decisions reflect your values, your priorities, your true preferences, and sometimes they do. But a lot of the time, your decisions reflect what time of day it is, how many choices you've already made, how much mental fuel you have left, how many tabs are open in your brain that haven't been closed yet. And that means the version of you at 9 in the morning is not the same as the version of you at 9 at night. Not because you've changed as a person, but because your capacity to process decisions has quietly worn away. This doesn't mean every late-night decision is wrong. It doesn't mean you should never trust yourself after a certain hour. It just means you're working with less than you think you are, and pretending otherwise doesn't help. You can't always feel decision fatigue happening. That's what makes it so effective at shaping your behavior without your awareness. It slips in quietly, makes you a little less thoughtful, a little more reactive, and then disappears by the next morning, leaving you to wonder why you agreed to something you didn't want or bought something you didn't need. The strange thing is how normalized this is. Everyone experiences this, but almost no one talks about it in these terms. Instead, we talk about willpower, discipline, self-control. We frame it as a personal shortcoming instead of a predictable, measurable cognitive process. And because we frame it that way, we keep trying to fix it with the wrong tools. We tell ourselves to try harder, to be more mindful, to think things through. But thinking things through is exactly what's already been exhausted. You can't think your way out of decision fatigue. It's not a problem of clarity. It's a problem of capacity. And capacity, unlike motivation, doesn't respond to pep talks. There's also something worth noticing about how modern life amplifies this. 50 years ago, people made far fewer decisions in a day. There were fewer options in stores, fewer channels on television, fewer ways to communicate, fewer brands of cereal. Now, every aspect of life is designed to offer you choices: what to watch, what to listen to, what to read, what to buy, what to respond to, what to ignore. The sheer volume of options you encounter daily is unprecedented, and your brain hasn't evolved to handle that volume. It's still operating with the same decision-making hardware it had thousands of years ago when choices were simpler and fewer, so it does what it can. It processes, it evaluates, it chooses, until it can't anymore. This is why people who seem to have their lives together often have very simple routines: the same breakfast, the same workout, the same schedule. It's not because they lack creativity or spontaneity. It's because they've figured out, consciously or not, that reducing decisions in some areas creates capacity for decisions in others. When you automate the small things, you preserve energy for the things that actually matter. And when you don't, you end up spending that energy on pasta sauce. So the next time you find yourself staring at two identical options, unable to choose, and feeling a quiet frustration with yourself, you might want to pause, not to make the decision easier, but to recognize what's actually happening. You're not broken. You're not indecisive. You're not overthinking. You're just running on empty. And your brain is doing exactly what it's designed to do when that happens. It's slowing down. It's resisting. It's trying to protect what little it has left. That's not failure. That's just how it works. And understanding that won't make the pasta sauce decision any easier. But it might make you stop blaming yourself for struggling with it, because the problem was never you. It was everything that came before.